they be able to rebut once I go into mine, or?
He'll get an opportunity for closing arguments like we discussed.
And the same thing for me then?
Yeah, and same thing for you. Also, I'm assuming no one brought anything new today. Everything was previously exchanged.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Swartz, did you get the electronic file that was sent?
Yes.
Okay, and did you have a chance to review that? Everything,
Yes.
all your exhibits were in there?
478
Yeah.
pages or something,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And CDTFA, you guys also received that?
We did.
File?
Yes.
You did? It looked complete to you? There's nothing omitted? Your submissions?
It looked complete.
Okay. Thanks.
Since we have 8 minutes.
The reason we can't start till 1 is because this is open to the public and it's officially noticed. So if someone from the public were to want to watch this and attend this and we start early, we're reaching our duties. So
I'm in no
Live
hurry.
streaming on YouTube. So
I'm in no hurry.
we're waiting.
We need makeup artists.
Right?
Also, one other thing, Mr. Swartz.
You're fine
at the
with
freedom of
starting,
conference,
Yeah.
We confirmed that the only issues in dispute was the measure of tax. Or
The calculations.
Right, the calculations and the fraud penalty.
Yes.
Okay.
Once I do get to start reading on my end, I can start, I mean, I had to write stuff down because I'm not familiar with all this, so I'm going to be reading from my statement, but I'm within a lot of time that you allowed me.
Correct.
Okay.
I had a hearing last week and Judge Anjija was the lead panelist. Everyone was ready to go, so we just started early. Maybe they determined that we're best. Maybe that one wasn't. I don't know. Location wasn't up until the same way, or maybe that was just. Oops.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions about this hearing today? Before we proceed, we have some time, so.
Not that I can think of, I just, as long as I got the opportunity to present my argument and state it the way that I typed it out, I don't think, I mean, I think it should be okay.
Okay.
It's going to be pretty direct, it's going to be
Appreciate that.
right in there.
Yeah.
So I'll try not to drag it out, but I do have to cover certain issues so we all understand where my train of thought is. But just be patient with me. During the hearing, do you interrupt at all, or, I mean, like, if there's something you need to ask me, a question or
Generally,
anything?
no. You're
Generally-
allowed to make your presentation. But
Okay.
If there's something that, is best clarified just at that moment, I may interrupt, or one of the panel members may interrupt.
Okay.
Yeah. And then following your testimony,
Hi,
you'll have a chance to ask questions of.
Yes.
Joshua Aldrich.
Would you like a business card?
That is lovely.
I have one in there.
It's making us smile when I see them sharp.
She doesn't need one, but if you have one, it could be nice.
Mr. Smith, who works at Maredia. I've been a co-reporter here for 25 years.
I haven't been in Fresno before,
There's
in
some
Sacramento.
bunch of Mr. Smiths.
I'm
You know, there's
not
a
the
lot of-
only Mr. Smith.
You're not the only
I'm not,
Mr. Smith.
no.
This is a
Shocker to
old
hear.
BOE one, but
That's okay. That'll work. Thank you so much.
It's not like Anjija or something, you know.
good luck with mine.
I have another question, too. When I refer to an exhibit, I give you time to look it up, or I can just read it, or, I mean, if you
Fine,
want
just
to
yeah.
follow through?
Brief
Okay.
moment.
Okay.
Do you have copies of that electronic file that was sent to you? There should be a
Not
page
with-
number listed at the top, so if you printed from that document,
No,
okay.
I'm just going to be going off of my exhibit.
Okay.
exhibit numbers.
We have that too, it's also in the class.
Okay. All right.
I have it too, but
I'll have it in stereo, but no.
As a word of warning, I've been told these mics are extremely sensitive, so you may want to,
Back up.
yeah, keep a distance from me.
Technology is lost on
Sure, let's try it. Test. That's not too bad. Is that, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. Closer than this.
nice.
Okay, I'm calling the case for partnership of Zulfiqar, Qamruddin, Bawani, Shaukat, Maredia, and Harry Swartz, OTA case number 1805-3151.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Fresno and the Office of Tax Appeals. We are opening the record in the appeal of partnership of Bawani, Maredia, and Swartz, DBA Valley-Wide Distribution before the Office of Tax Appeals. The case number is 180-53151. This hearing is being convened in Fresno on February 28, 2019. The time is 1 p.m. Today's case is being heard by a panel of 3 judges. My name is Win Dang, and I'll be the lead judge for purposes of conducting this hearing. Also on the panel with me today is Judge Jeffrey Njija and Judge Linda Chang. At this time, will the parties please introduce themselves for the record, beginning with appellant?
My name's Harry Swartz.
Thank you, Mr. Swartz. And CDTFA.
Good afternoon, I'm Josh Aldrich with the CDTFA.
I'm Stephen Smith with CDTFA.
I'm Shalene Zelmi with CDTFA.
Thank you. Issues I have before me today are whether adjustments are warranted to the measure for unreported distributions of untaxed tobacco products in California, and also whether CDTFA has shown that the 25% fraud penalty is supported by clear and convincing evidence. Mr. Swartz, does that sound correct to you?
Yeah.
As far as the issues? Thank you. CDTFA? As
Yes.
far as the issues? Okay, great, thank you. Prior to the hearing, the parties have communicated to me that they intend to submit as evidence the exhibits that were previously attached to their briefs. CDTFA also had an additional submission following the pre-hearing conference. We took all those exhibits and combined them into an electronic PDF file, which was sent to the parties. Mr. Swartz, did you receive that file, and did you have a chance to review that file?
Yes, I did.
And does that file look accurate to you as far as your submissions? And
Oh, yes.
it contains everything that you intend to submit?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And are there any objections to admitting that file today into the record? Thank you. And CDTFA, the same questions. Did you receive that file?
We did.
Okay, and you had a chance to review it?
We did.
And
No
no errors?
objections.
Okay, and are there any objections?
No.
No objections. Thank you. With that being said, this file, this PDF file, it will now be admitted into the record as evidence. As we stated prior to this hearing, there was a little snafu, and I'd like to exchange the order of presentation because CDTFA has a burden of proof to establish fraud that would allow them to go first. So CDTFA, if you're prepared, you would begin, and you have 15 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you. The adjusted FBO should be upheld because it was calculated using purchase records obtained directly from out-of-state vendors, as well as invoices and bank statements that were received or were seized during the execution of a search warrant. These were compared to the actual filings of appellant and the partnership. Adjustments were given for non-tobacco items, and credits were applied for seized tobacco items. The audit clearly indicates that $202,422 in credits were granted for seized tobacco products for this liability period. There were 3 liability periods. This liability period is from February 1st, 2006 through May 31st, 2007. Appellant contended that the measure is not accurate based on theft of tobacco products. However, appellant has not identified which transactions or products were stolen, and they haven't provided any documentary proof that a theft occurred. Typical proof may include an insurance claim or a police report, but neither of those were provided. The audit was performed using the best available records and calculated reasonably. Therefore, we respectfully request that you uphold the adjusted FBO. There's clear and convincing evidence that appellant and his partners committed fraud or intended to evade excise tax. Therefore, a 25% penalty must be added to the adjusted FBO pursuant to Revenue and Taxation Code Section 30205. Each partner had extensive knowledge in cigarette and tobacco products. At the time of the search warrant, there were several documents found that would have provided the requisite knowledge to accurately report cigarette and tobacco products. Those included publication 4, California Cigarette and Tobacco Products Tax Law Guide, publication 15, California Cigarette and Tobacco Products Tax Registration Guide, as well as California Revenue and Taxation Code Sections 30101 through 30111. In addition, the partners received separate separate letters and bulletins from the CDTFA, well, the BOE, formerly the CDTFA, actually the reverse of that, excuse me, which included information on why tax fraud in the cigarette industry hurts competitors. One of the partners pled guilty to a felony tax evasion prior to joining the partnership, and this was specifically regarding cigarette and tobacco products. Therefore, the partners had the requisite knowledge to correctly report the measure should they have chosen to. During the 16th month liability period, appellant and his partners underreported the taxable measure by $821,739. This resulted in the non-payment of $384,240 in excise tax. Of the 16-month period, 14 months were underreported. The monthly average for the underreported months was $59,409.29. The sum of the underreporting and the monthly average of the underreporting cannot be reasonably attributed to a miscalculation or error, which is evidence of fraud or intent to evade. Furthermore, at the time of the search warrant, there were two license locations and 4 locations being used by Valleywide. So they knew how to obtain a license since they had done so for suites 202 and 203, but were using suites 114 and 201 without the proper license. This shows also an intent because a common practice in tobacco products evasion and fraud is to have tobacco products stored at a separate site. Based on the foregoing, appellant Swartz is jointly and severally liable for the unpaid liabilities of the Bawani Maredia Swartz partnership doing business as Valleywide distributors. And we concur with the Appeals Division's recommendation. We are available for questions.
Thank you. Does that conclude your opening statement?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Swartz, you have 40 minutes for your presentation, but before you begin, I will need to swear you in because we can only accept testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to being sworn in this time? No. Okay. You want to stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay. You may be seated. And if you're ready, you have 40 minutes to begin.
Yeah, it'll be a little lengthy, but sorry about that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, your honors of the court. I'm thankful to have this opportunity to voice my concerns to the court on the issues before us this day. I would like to ask the court to please be patient with me, considering I'm not as familiar with the procedures as all of you are. What I want to argue is about how the calculations were formed from the beginning. So I have to go back into the search warrant to show that the calculations that they actually determined were actually calculated wrong. So what I want to do is go over a little bit of 5 different codes, laws, and rules that apply to tobacco tax that's upheld here in California. The first one that I want to read from is, I have it in my opening brief that I sent to you. It's on the 4th page, and it's going to be Revenue and Tax Codes 3123B. Okay. It states that there shall be imposed upon every distributor a tax upon distribution of tobacco products based on the wholesale cost of these products at a tax rate as determined annually by the state BOE, which is equivalent to the combined rate of tax imposed on cigarettes by subdivision A and the other provisions of this part. The next revenue and tax code is 3109, and it reads, unless the contrary is established, it is presumed that all cigarettes or tobacco products acquired by a distributor are untaxed cigarettes or tobacco products, and that cigarettes or tobacco products manufactured in the state or transported to the state and no longer in the possession of the distributor have been distributed. It's pretty simple there, stating how the tobacco is brought in and when it's paid upon distribution. The next part I want to read from is my exhibit number 2, which is the tobacco products distributor's tax return. And on that first page, underneath imposition of tax, it states, every distributor must pay tax upon the distribution of untaxed tobacco products in this state. And if you drop down to the 10th paragraph, just under filing requirements, I want to read the first 2 sentences in there. Every person who distributes tobacco products in the state must file this tax return on or before the 25th day of the month following the month for which the tax is due. The tax return must be filed even if there was no distributions during the period covered by the return. I'm going to go into the second page, and just underneath preparation of return, that second paragraph, I want to read 2 sentences there also. It says, wholesale cost of all tobacco products distributed, enter the wholesale cost as defined of untaxed tobacco products as that you distributed. So now we kind of understand that the tobacco tax is paid upon the distribution and not when you bring it into the state or warehouse it within the state. That last example on page 2 there, to give you an idea, the latter tax example would be, I buy $75,000 worth of tobacco product from a manufacturer or other distributor, and then I sell $42,000 worth of tobacco, depending on the month. I would pay the tobacco tax on the $42,000 worth of tobacco product only on the 25th of said month. The remaining $33,000 worth of tobacco product tax would be paid when and if it sells on the month that it is sold. So now I want to go into my exhibit number 3, and I'm going to be reading from page 3 under the probable cause. This is the warrant part, statement of probable cause. And I'm going to read that first paragraph. It's 2 sentences, actually, under results of investigation. On April 20th, 2006, your affiant prepared an investigative complaint alleging that a business known as Valleywide Distributors in Bakersfield had received untaxed tobacco products in excess of amounts reported to the BOE. This was discovered during your affiant's, who was Mike Maddox at this time, review of tobacco product shipment records provided by 3 out-of-state suppliers known as U.S. Smokeless Tobacco, Altitas USA, and Swisher International. These are powerful statements of an allegement by the affiant, but that statement is actually a flagrant, misleading statement. These 2 sentences, as I go forward and show this court, they are the downfall of the warrant. I want to go into staying in this warrant. I need to turn to page 6. And I'm going to read that first few lines, 13 through 20 there. Your affiant, which is Mike Maddox, and Molina, and I don't remember his first name, was Fred or Frank or something like that, performed dumpster dives each evening of the surveillance and found documents evidencing sales and deliveries of tobacco products from Valleywide Distributors to customers located throughout California, including sales invoices and delivery manifest from DHL. Also, several documents were found evidencing multiple purchases and deliveries of untaxed tobacco products from out-of-state suppliers, including UST, Altitas, Swisher, Little Brown Smoke Shack, Conwood Sales Company, Briggs Tobacco, Renegade Tobacco, and Intercontinental Cigar Company. I'm going to drop down to 25 through 28, and it goes over to 2 more sentences on the following page. The invoices found during the dumpster dives include those from UST and Altitas. Each invoice from UST included a statement at the bottom that read, customer responsible for applicable state tobacco taxes. Each invoice from Altitas included a statement at the bottom that read, the tobacco products described here within are sold without payment of state or local taxes unless such taxes are separately stated on invoice. Your affiant knows from experience that such statements are commonly found on invoices from out-of-state tobacco product suppliers in order to advise the customer of the respective state tax obligations. I would like to point out that these dumpster dives, I want to backtrack just one thing. I only need to show preponderance in this stuff, but I also want my Fourth Amendment rights kept in thought as I proceed through this, because there is violations there once I get this all laid out.
Mr. Swartz, if I could just interrupt you for a
Yes.
moment. Today, this panel only has the authority to address the tax at issue and not any
Yeah, I'm not
violation
asking
of
you-
your rights.
Yes, okay.
You could stay focused on that. I'd
Okay,
appreciate it.
Okay, sure. Anyways, I'd like to point out that these dumpster dives were on a closed-lid dumpster on private property Also, you will notice that Mr. Maddox uses bold print on the liability of tobacco tax as if there's something completely wrong. And please remember that this is all going on before the search warrant is issued. Now, what I'd like to do is go over to Exhibit number 1, and that's the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration Appeals Bureau decision statement. And I'm going to go into page 14, and I'm going to read that last paragraph at the bottom down there, and I believe it goes over to a sentence or two on the next page. Okay. ISOB next found that petitioner intentionally evaded the cigarette and tobacco products tax law by substantially underreporting its tax liability. When examining the records obtained from the out-of-state vendors, ISOB noted that there were significant differences for each quarter in which the purchase records were obtained. After executing the search warrant and seized additional purchase records, ISOB determined that the petitioner substantially underreported its taxable distributions of tobacco products in almost every single quarter of the liability period. For example, in February 2006, petitioner made total purchases of untaxed tobacco products of $56,311, but only reported $22,116 of taxable distributions of untaxed tobacco products in California, which results in a deficiency of $32,830 and an error ratio of 58%. In March 2006, petitioner made total purchases of untaxed tobacco products of $71,858, but only reported $48,142 of taxable distributions of tobacco products, which results in a difference of $23,000 at a ratio of 33%. Staying in this same page here, one thing I want to do is I want to read that one sentence so you can keep this in the back of your mind. It's right up at the beginning. It says, when examining the records obtained from the out-of-state vendors, ISOB noted that there were significant differences for each quarter in which the purchase records were obtained. Again, this is before the warrant is issued. Now, staying in the same exhibit, I'm going to go up to page 3, and I'm going to read that first top paragraph up there. In 2006, CDTFA received an anonymous complaint that Valleywide was receiving untaxed tobacco products and not properly reporting those taxable distributions of tobacco products. Based on this complaint, an ISOB investigator obtained tobacco products shipment records from 3 out-of-state vendors, U.S. Smokeless Tobacco Brands, Altitas, and Swisher International, to Valleywide. Based on a review of the shipment records and Valleywide's reported tobacco distributions, the investigator determined that Valleywide was significantly underreporting its distribution of tobacco products in California. First of all, there was an anonymous complaint. It was actually the owner of the business that called in, which was Zulfiqar Bawani. I want to reread that last sentence because that goes with that other sentence that I read at that other end. It really ties in together. Based on a review of the shipment records and Valleywide's reported tobacco distributions, the investigator determined that the Valleywide was significantly underreporting its distributions of tobacco products in California. This is all before the warrant is issued. These are powerful allegations from the investigator of the ISOB, but nevertheless, he determined this. And this also shows that the CDTFA agrees with the way the ISOB has done their calculations. But I just accused the ISOB of an erroneous miscalculation to come into this play. Okay, you just heard a moment ago how taxes paid on tobacco by distribution allowed by law. Then tell me how the ISOB and CDTFA can take monthly purchase receipts and then compare them to monthly tobacco tax returns to get a tax error ratio. You can't. But this is just what you heard in Exhibit number 1 on page 14, in that last paragraph, in their admissions of calculating tax error ratios. And also in Exhibit number 3, the warrant, page 3, the affiant admits the same calculating before the warrant is issued. You cannot just take 3 out-of-state suppliers' purchase receipts. And it would not matter even if you had all tobacco suppliers' purchase receipts and then compare them to monthly tobacco tax returns. Even if you match the same month purchase receipts to the same month tobacco tax returns or to any other month, you will always have a deficiency. This is because you only pay tax on what you sold in that month. There will be times when you have some tobacco products sitting on the shelf for 2 to 12 months or longer before it is distributed, and then you pay said tax. I would like the court to ask our tax specialist here to explain how you can take only 3 out-of-state suppliers' purchase receipts, then compare them to monthly tobacco tax returns that you only pay tax on what you sold in any particular month, and come up with a tax error. You can't. So now I ask the court, how could the ISOB's calculations be correct then? They can't be. This clearly shows that what the ISOB and CDTFA has said is no way possible. And this is the downfall. Without doing an audit, you cannot, and I say cannot, determine a tax error ratio by comparing only 3 out-of-state suppliers' purchase receipts to monthly tobacco tax returns. You must do a full audit. And again, this is all before the warrant is issued. This is simple accounting 101 that any junior college student would understand. These documented statements by the ISOB and CDTFA completely contradict what is allowed by law through Revenue and Tax Codes 3123B, 3109, and the filing of the Tobacco Products Distributor's tax return. This shows a blatant mishandling of calculations and misuse of Revenue and Tax Codes 3123B and 3109 on the part of the ISOB, and shows perjury to obtain a search warrant. This also shows a complete disregard to the rules of the Tobacco Products Distributor's tax return. You now understand their calculations were wrong from the get-go. Or at worst, they were doctored. Is there any questions at this point? Before I go further, because...
Yeah, go ahead and please proceed.
Okay. I've shown beyond a reasonable doubt right there that these are factual documentations and they're irrefutable. They cannot be denied. I believe that unfortunately this search warrant was rubber stamped because no judge that understands tobacco laws would have agreed in the way that the calculations were done from the beginning. I still do not understand why the CDTFA and ISOB went out of their way to obtain a search warrant on an alleged tobacco tax evasion. In Exhibit Number 9, under AB 71, 22978.1 and 22978.5, it clearly states that all distributors and wholesalers must keep on hand on site a year's worth of records of purchases and sales and shall be made available for inspection from the CDTFA or law enforcement agency of said records. Not complying with this law is a crime. The CDTFA, ISOB, or any law enforcement agency could have just walked in, looked at the records with no search warrant needed. I believe the true intent of the search warrant was a witch hunt for ownership. If the ISOB had so much probable cause, and after serving of said search warrant, the court must ask why was there not any criminal convictions or arrests. In fact, the only reason we are here is vindictiveness on the part of the state. The Attorney General, losing any opportunity to press any alleged charges, suggests to the CDTFA to go after valley-wide distributors on a civil case. This could be seen in Exhibit Number 7 under the conclusion paragraph. So now I ask the court to dismiss this case due to my Fourth Amendment rights, and I know that you can't do anything on there, but there was never any criminal intent proven and nothing, and I say nothing, that was seized from 5 different locations that would suggest or show that there was any crime being committed. This case should be dismissed because of a deceitful filing of a probable cause search warrant with an erroneous miscalculation that led to the destruction of Valleywide Distributors. Also, any fraud charges should also be dismissed since their calculations are all based upon purchase receipts and not actual sales as allowed by Tax and Revenue Codes 3123B, 3109, and the rules of the Tobacco Products Distributors Tax Return. They compared purchase receipts to monthly tobacco taxes paid by Valleywide Distributors to get their tax error ratios without doing an audit on inventory. This again cannot be denied. It is irrefutable. Another one of my main concerns is the way that the ISOB and CDTFA have mishandled documentation. The failure of the ISOB handling the return of said search warrant shows a complete lack of competency to return all documentation. As we can see in Exhibit number 5, the 4th page, the 7th page through the 18th page, and the 19th page through the 29th page was not submitted with Exhibit number 3, the original search warrant that I received from the Kern County Superior Court. I can understand 1 or 2 documents not being filed, but it should still be none. But in this case, it was 24 pages that were not returned with the original search warrant. It makes us wonder whether it was incompetency or were they trying to hide something. Either way, it was one of these things. The CDTFA has shown negligence on my request for disclosure of documentation. If we look at Exhibit number 6, we can see that I requested all vendors' purchase receipts, and the CDTFA sent me a package about that big, and that's not what a multi-million-dollar business of documents would have. And again, they seized 2 large filing cabinets that were 5 foot in height, 2 foot in depth of all documentation, all computers, and it was like 4 or 5 computers, and several boxes of more documentation as seen in Exhibit number 3, the first 4 pages, the 12th page, and the 14th page, with some of these pages having up to 22 lines each of seized property. So I should have received a package a lot bigger than that. And I was only asking for receipts from the vendors so I can do some calculating, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. Now I would like to ask the CDTFA to tell us how much product they seized illegally that was never returned. Now, adding arrogance to ignorance or injury to insult, they seized more than $2,115,686 worth of tobacco products as seen in Exhibit number 5, and want Valleywide Distributors to pay tax on $821,731 in a miscalculated tax. These were the 24 pages that were not returned with the original search warrant. I have taken the liberty of calculating these documents with actual purchase receipts from vendors dealing with Valleywide Distributors. As seen in Exhibit number 5, the first 2 pages are cost of product purchased by Valleywide Distributors. The 3rd page is a total of these purchases that were seized by the CDTFA and ISOB. I did guesstimate on some of the cigarette vendors because CDTFA did not send these documents from my request. But I can assure you the price I listed was no less than or more than I listed. This is why you see 2 totals, a low total and a high total. I used the low total for the illegally seized products. This total also does not include the last 11 pages in Exhibit number 5 of tobacco products also seized by the CDTFA and ISOB. Again, this cannot be denied. It is irrefutable. Now, before I conclude, I would ask the court to please remember the key words in this issue of an alleged tobacco tax evasion are calculations and audit. These 2 words are completely intertwined and are the only true way to determine a tax error. In conclusion, we now know without a doubt that the ISOB investigator, Mike Maddox, admits on page 3, Exhibit number 3 of probable cause, that he took only 3 out-of-state suppliers' purchase receipts and then compared them to monthly tobacco tax returns, which contradicts what is allowed by law, to determine his tax errors without doing any kind of audit. As I've shown through the ISOB's probable cause search warrant in Exhibit Number 3 and the CDTFA Appeal Bureau's decision in Exhibit Number 1, that there is actually no possible way that the ISOB or CDTFA could have known any tax error ratio before the search warrant was served without an audit, or after it was served, for they seized illegally only 80 to 85% of the inventory, leaving them no possible way for having done any accurate audit on inventory. If we look at the time frame of the ISOB's calculations before the warrant was served, they would have had to have done a complete audit on Valleywide Distributors' complete records and complete inventory to have calculated any form of tax error. This is how you calculate tax error ratios. You cannot just wing it as did the ISOB and CDTFA. This is the root to the whole problem before us. The sad situation here is so simple that a complete audit of records and inventory could have solved this problem. But now we can never know because of the debacle that these two state agencies have created. I rest my argument at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Swartz. Mr. Aldrich, at this time, do you have any questions for appellant? If you'd like, you can take a minute.
No, not for him.
Panel members, Judge Chang, do you have any questions for Mr. Swartz? No questions. Judge Anjija? Sure. So we're just going to move to closing arguments, since there's no questions for you, Mr. Swartz. UTFA, if you're ready, you have 10 minutes for your closing presentation.
Appellant has mentioned the warrants multiple times. As we're aware, we're not here to discuss the validity of the warrants or not, but just for clarification of the court or the panel, the Superior Court upheld the search warrants. There were multiple search warrants, not just one. There was at least 3. And they were upheld after Bawani's attorney filed a motion to quash. Also, there seems to be a conflation in between probable cause and what that standard is versus what the standard is for an audit. Regarding the statement that appellant made that product could sit on the shelf for 2 months to years, on page 36 of the exhibit package, there's a memorandum of interview contact. The sentence that begins, Swartz was asked about cigarette and tobacco purchasing. Says that Swartz explained that even though some tobacco has a shelf life of a year or so, all cigarettes and tobacco turns over each month, some as often as weekly. Swartz purchases $200 to $300 of cigarettes and tobacco each month. So the idea that tobacco is sitting on shelves for 2 months or 3 or 2 years is unlikely, since that's his own statement. And then also the audit used the actual records from the business, from the purchase invoices from the vendors, the bank statements. So it's quite accurate, actually. And there also seems to be some sort of confusion between the requirements to retain records. Distributors for inspection purposes are required to retain records for a year, and then a year at the location, and then 4 years off premises. However, For audit purposes, Mr. Swartz was put on notice as of the date of the first search warrant that this was a criminal investigation. So he should have been made aware to keep records. Also, a filled billing order was sent. I provided that in our submission. It's the first one. I think it was November 25th, 08. That would be a further reminder or notice, hey, you should be keeping records. Excuse me? Huh? Sorry, was it November 5th? And I can provide a page number for you if you like. So that would be page 4. Furthermore, regarding his request for records, the 2 other partners requested all the records be returned to them, and there's email documentation of that, should the panel request that. But they contacted us April 28th of 2014, and we arranged for the return of all of those documents, computers. They were returned by a shipping company to Texas pursuant to their instruction. Prior to the return, Mr. Swartz could have made arrangements with the ID department to review any of the records he wanted. They were in West Sacramento, so he could have came in and made copies of them at his leisure, but he didn't do that.
If I could add one thing, I think to clarify, when Mr. Swartz refers to Mr. Maddox looking at purchase invoices from 3 vendors and comparing that to sales reports, that wasn't the audit. That was the investigatory lead that led the investigations division to believe there was underreporting. And it was part of what led to obtaining the search warrant. But after the search warrant was executed and records were seized, the audit was based off of actual records, not just from those 3 vendors. And so I believe that Mr. Swartz is confused about how the audit was performed. That wasn't the audit, that was just the lead to cause us to perform an audit. And so I think we've been talking past each other a little bit at this hearing.
And that concludes our closing.
Thank you, Mr. Aldrich. Mr. Swartz, you now have 10 minutes for your closing arguments.
Okay, trying to go back over a couple of things that they're talking about. Tobacco can sit on the shelf for longer than 2 months or a year. We had plenty of tobacco in the warehouse that was probably several years old, including canceled out cigarettes that the state comes down and they cancel it out, return us the tax for the purchase of the stamps. And as far as what Mike, or the ISOB investigator did, he did do exactly what it states. He took 3 out-of-state suppliers only and then compared them to tobacco taxes that we paid on a monthly basis, that you only pay whatever you sell. So there's no way to really get a tax error from there. It's impossible. And as far as them saying that they did an audit, they did not do an audit on inventory, which is just as important as the records. You must do both, the records and the inventory, to come up with any kind of tax error. That's just the bottom line. There's no way of getting around it. There was 5 search warrants that were served, and all the locations did not need tobacco licensing, as they had stated. Some of them, like in one of the warehouses at 114, we just kept miscellaneous merchandise there, but yet they claimed there was tobacco there and there wasn't anything. It was never seized. Trying to remember what else they were going over. Yeah, I can't think of, I mean, other than what I've already stated, there's no way they could have determined a calculation beforehand. It's impossible. And so all that stuff, if you find that to be true in the beginning, that they miscalculated, everything after it is false. Because like they stated, we purchase so much a month, and yet we only report it. And they left that differences. It should be that way, because it's always carried over. We did not sell, if I brought in $200,000 worth in a month, I may have only sold $100,000 that month. And so the next month I might have sold $150,000. You don't know for sure, because unless you do an audit on the full records and inventory, very critical, it's the only way you can tell a tax error. But they show that we reported every month, and even we overpaid a couple times according to them. But that's not neither here nor there right now. The main thing is the calculation from the beginning was definitely wrong. There's no way they could have came up with a tax error. It's impossible without doing a full audit. So today I've shown, not through my own doctrine of documentation or unwarranted statements, as did the ISOB and the CDTFA, but today I have shown more holes in the prepared documentation and statements of the CDTFA, ISOB, and the CDTFA Appeal Bureau's documentations than should be necessary for automatic dismissal on preponderance alone. I have shown facts upon facts, shown and proven by factual documentation and physical evidence that cannot be denied. It is irrefutable, and it is more likely than not to be true. I have shown and exceeded my requirements of preponderance. I have shown beyond reasonable doubt on the way that they calculated the taxes from the beginning. I'm now asking the court to serve justice by dismissing this gross negligence of injustice towards Valley-wide distributors and myself from the miscalculating statements of the ISOB in the beginning. I rest myself. I thank the court for its time, too.
Thank you, Mr. Swartz. Before I turn this over to my panel members, one of who looks very eager here, I just had two quick clarifying questions for you regarding your arguments. Are you disputing the total purchase amount of tobacco products for this liability period that had been calculated by the CDTFA?
Yes, because whatever they showed in there, they showed complete. The problem is, like I said, there's no way they could have figured out any kind of tax error without doing the full audit, with the inventory included. And since they didn't seize all the inventory, there's no true way to get to the bottom line of that audit.
Sorry, my question was just toward the purchases that had been made for that period of time, not the actual amount that you claim.
Yeah, I think, if I remember right, I read
You guys
somewhere-
on the same page with?
No, I
No?
dispute that too, because like they stated like there was $202,000 worth of tobacco on purchases, but my calculations from exhibit number 5, actually I believe it was closer to 800,000 or 900,000 in tobacco products that they seized. See, they took over $2 million worth of our product that we never got back, and there was never any criminal prosecution, and they still want tax on a miscalculated tax? I don't get it.
Are you calculating your purchases from different records than what
No, what they seized. I calculated from what they seized.
you're saying that that amount is different than?
Yes,
the
they
amount
say
that's-
202,000 or something. Mine was 800,000.
CDTFA, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, so just to point out, when we seized the tobacco products and we didn't seize stamped cigarettes, we did seize cigarettes, but those aren't included in the audit because there hadn't been a distribution. So cigarettes and tobacco products are treated differently according to the Revenue and Tax Code. And the tobacco products are calculated using the measure, the wholesale cost is the measure, and a rate, which is set yearly, is applied to that measure. Whereas a cigarette will have a set fee for each stamp on each pack of cigarettes. So that's the reason we didn't seized the stamped cigarettes. And it would be inappropriate to include the seized cigarettes that were ultimately destroyed by the order of the court because there hadn't been any distribution. If you include them against the cost of the, if you had included them in the audit against the measure, then it would have been an overage because you hadn't actually distributed them, the
And
partner.
Cigarettes are not included in the measure of tax here. For the tobacco products, the way the audit was performed was if we had record of purchase, it was presumed taxable. We gave credit for tobacco product that was seized from licensed locations, because in that instance, that tobacco product would be included in taxable purchases, but it would not yet have been distributed, so tax would not yet have been imposed upon that product. And so that was, we allowed credit, and I think it was about $202,000 worth of credits for that.
For this period, it was 209,000, which was resulted, after other adjustments, resulted in a reduction in the overall measure for 202 approximately.
We also seized tobacco product from unlicensed locations, and in that case, we did not allow credits. And the reason for that is tobacco products that's stored in an unlicensed location is already subject to tax. The tax is imposed on the sale or use of untaxed product, and the use is the exercise of any right of ownership. However, there's an exclusion for licensed distributors who hold on to product for resale. So when it's in inventory in a licensed location, it's not yet subject to tax, but if it's in an unlicensed location, it is. So that's why we treated the product in an unlicensed location differently than the licensed location.
I'm just wondering why the total purchase amounts would be different if everyone's looking at the same
I don't know that
invoices.
they are really. I think sometimes there might be some confusion about whether their purchase amounts are taxable
No.
measure.
Okay, thank you. Judge Ng, did you have questions?
Well, that answered one of the questions that I had, because we have, my experience typically is the unlicensed situation. The problem there is if it's unlicensed, any incident of ownership over the product is a distribution, so it's taxable the minute you bring it into the state. We have both, which helps explain some of the confusion. My other question is, and I understand the argument that you have inventory on hand, sales are less than inventory, so there's going to be that discrepancy. You can reconcile, a person can reconcile ending inventory along with beginning inventory and purchases along with what was reported, and should be able to explain that kind of a discrepancy. Has that been done? In other words, I understand the argument is pointing out the flaw in the audit method. I'm not, have we looked at the total records you're saying they didn't look at? Have you been able to provide that and to be able to show where there's no errors at all? Because your argument is there's no errors.
And what now? I'm confused. There's a big error from the calculating from the very beginning.
You're comparing total purchases to what was reported, and you're saying there's leftover inventory on hand. So we should be able to account for that with some sort of an ending inventory reconciliation to show that all that was purchased was sold. Or maybe I'll ask
But-
TFA, is it explained by the fact that some of that product was at an unlicensed location and already taxable?
I think there's two things. And Shelley's sending me notes because she spent many hours actually doing the reconciliation of looking at the seized inventory, the seized product, and comparing it to the purchase invoices. There's about $12,000 in product that couldn't be tied to an invoice, so we didn't allow a credit for that. I think that's right.
And this is wholesale costs measured?
Yes.
Measured.
There's about $202,000 worth of product that a credit was allowed for because it was seized from the licensed location, and it could be tied to purchase invoices in this audit period. And I don't know the amount that was seized from the unlicensed location.
There was $245,477 in measure seized from the unlicensed location. And then also in the third liability period, which was just June '07 to July '07, there was a credit of $106,465 in measure for the seized tobacco from the licensed location. And you can see that in the exhibit that I submitted. I submitted the audit work paper or the Excel spreadsheet for that third liability period. And it will have included a credit for the seized OTP. Sorry, give me a second to find the page. Page 120. And so in columns K, labeled 7A10, there's a credit for seized tobacco products of $106,465.
I guess following up very briefly on Judge Njiji's question, do you have an explanation for what that difference may be between what you reported and the purchase amounts that were, sorry, not the amounts computed by CBTFA?
My estimates there in that exhibit number 5 you're talking about is
Yes.
the total of all product that they'd seized. They're claiming that part of it's not, or was seizable because there wasn't a license on that particular building, even though we rented the whole building out. And there are different suite numbers, but we connected all together all the time, except for 114. It was a separate unit, but we never kept tobacco there. We only kept miscellaneous merchandise there.
I guess my question is, are you saying that I didn't purchase this many tobacco products, or are you saying that I simply didn't distribute as many as they're claiming I distributed?
How much they're claiming that we distributed how much?
As CBTFA? You have
The additional measure is 800 and
Yeah, but total distributions.
total distributions, that would be a
It's okay, Mr. Eldridge.
There-
They're saying, in essence, that you have 800-some thousand of distributions are unaccounted for. Are you saying, do
That's
you have an
what I-
explanation for that? Or are you saying, I simply didn't
There's
purchase
800
that many
yeah, there's-
tobacco?
No, there's over $800,000 worth of tobacco that they seized.
Okay.
So it's kind of funny that they come up with the same calculation.
I understand. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And again, one other thing I'd like to point out, too, they did not seize it all because there was still some tobacco there and stamped cigarettes. So again, there's no way to do an accurate tax error without having it all there.
Mr. Eldridge, did you want to respond?
well, they continued to receive OTP after the search warrant, so it wouldn't have been possible to seize it at that time. But all the purchase invoices were reconciled to the actual products.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm not talking about after the fact. I'm talking after they had left. There were still tobacco products there that they did not seize.
I think we understand your
Yeah,
position.
okay,
Thank you,
just
Mr.
making sure.
For the clarification.
Yeah.
My panel members, any further questions before we conclude? Okay, thank you, everyone, for your presentations and for coming out today. I really appreciate that. The record in this appeal is now closed, and this appeal is submitted for decision. So we'll endeavor to issue a written decision after meeting and deliberating on your presentations and the exhibits here sometime within 100 days. Thanks again. This hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.